The jarring, percussive roar of a jackhammer shattered the Saturday morning tranquility of Oakwood Preserve, a sound so violent and out of place, it was like a physical blow. Alana Washington, halfway through her second cup of coffee and reviewing blueprints for a new city library's accessibility features, shot up from her kitchen table, coffee sloshing over the rim of her mug. That sound was too close, too aggressive. Her heart leaped into her throat with a sudden sickening premonition. Maya. Her 10-year-old daughter, Maya, who used a bright purple power wheelchair with a fierce independent spirit, was supposed to be heading to her friend Chloe's house just 2 streets over. The new curb ramp at the end of their block, installed just last month after a protracted but ultimately successful negotiation with the city and a grudging approval from the HOA, was essential for that short journey. Alana raced to the front door, yanking it open, her eyes scanning frantically. The horrific sound was louder now, accompanied by the grating crunch of concrete. And then she saw it. At the corner, where the smooth, gentle slope of the brand new curb ramp had seamlessly merged sidewalk and street, stood Karen Albright, the iron-willed, perpetually aggrieved president of the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association. Dressed in incongruously pristine white gardening gloves and what looked like expensive athletic wear, Karen was wrestling with a heavy-duty rented jackhammer, its bit gouging mercilessly into the freshly poured concrete of the ramp. Chunks of gray material flew through the air, and a few feet away at the edge of what was now a jagged, impassable ruin of broken concrete and mangled rebar, sat Maya in her wheelchair, her small face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Maya wasn't crying. She looked stunned, her bright purple chair, usually a symbol of her vibrant mobility, now a stationary island surrounded by destruction. Karen. What in God's name are you doing? Elena's voice, when she finally found it, was a raw shout that barely carried over the jackhammer's din. Karen Albright switched off the jackhammer, the sudden silence almost as shocking as the noise. She turned, pushing a pair of safety goggles up onto her perfectly coiffed blonde hair, a thin, triumphant smile playing on her lips. "Oh, hello, Alana," she said, her voice dripping with a chillingly casual malice. "Just making a few necessary neighborhood improvements. This eyesore," she gestured dismissively at the demolished ramp with the jackhammer's bit, "was a clear violation of our community's aesthetic covenants. And frankly, it was attracting the wrong sort of attention. We have standards to maintain here in Oakwood Preserve." Bumped. "That ramp," Alana said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl as she strode towards Karen, her mind the mind of Alana Washington, Federal ADA Infrastructure Supervisor for the entire Southwestern District, already cataloging violations, already initiating protocols, was a federally mandated accessibility feature installed in full compliance with Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 204, regarding public rights-of-way. Its design and placement were approved by city engineers, and as you well know, by this very HOA after extensive review. Maya had now found her voice small and trembling. "Mommy, I can't get to Chloe's. Mrs. Albright broke my ramp." The sight of her daughter, so small, so vulnerable, marooned by this act of calculated destruction, fueled the cold fire igniting in Alana's chest. "You see what you've done, Karen." Alana's voice was quiet now, but freighted with an intensity that made Karen's smug smile flicker. "You haven't just damaged public property. You have deliberately and maliciously destroyed a critical piece of infrastructure essential for the mobility and safety of a child with a disability. You have created a hazard and a barrier where there was once access." Karen Albright scoffed, though a hint of unease was now visible in her eyes. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Alana. It's a bit of concrete. And let's be honest, this whole accessibility charade has gone too far. Oakwood Preserve is a community for able-bodied contributing families, perhaps if certain accommodations weren't so readily available." She let her gaze drift pointedly towards Maya. "People who don't quite fit in would realize this isn't the place for them. Maybe they'd simply choose to move out. That would solve a lot of problems, wouldn't it?" The naked venom in Karen's words, the unvarnished discriminatory intent, was breathtaking. This wasn't just about aesthetics or a misguided interpretation of HOA rules. This was a targeted attack, a deliberate attempt to drive her and Maya from their home. Alana took a deep, steadying breath. The professional in her, the supervisor who had overseen multi-million-dollar federal grants for accessible infrastructure, who had brought non-compliant municipalities and corporations to heel, was now fully engaged. Karen Albright, Alana said, her voice ringing with an authority that had silenced city councils and corporate lawyers, as an official representative of the U.S. Department of Justice ADA Enforcement Division. I am informing you that you are in direct violation of multiple federal statutes, including 42 U.S. Code, Paragraph 112.132 discrimination, 18 U.S. Code, Paragraph 249 hate crime acts, and potentially 18 U.S. Code, Paragraph 11361, willful destruction of government property given the federal funding and oversight involved in this ramp's initial approval and potential future maintenance. You will cease all activity. You will not touch that jackhammer again. You are, for all intents and purposes, at the scene of a federal offense. I am placing you under citizen's arrest until local and federal authorities arrive, which I am summoning right now. She pulled out her government-issued phone, her fingers already dialing her eyes, never leaving Karen Albright's now rapidly paling face. The smugness had vanished, replaced by a dawning, horrified realization. Karen had picked a fight with the wrong mother and the wrong federal supervisor. The sound of approaching sirens, though still distant, was already weaving its way through the shattered morning quiet of Oakwood Preserve, a harbinger of the storm Karen Albright had just unleashed upon herself. Maya watched her fear, now mingled with a flicker of awe at her mother's transformation from caregiver to formidable authority. The broken ramp lay between them, a symbol of hate, but also, Alana vowed silently, a catalyst for a reckoning long overdue. The arrival of local police, followed swiftly by federal agents Alana knew from joint task forces, turned the quiet suburban corner into a full-blown crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off the demolished ramp and the surrounding sidewalk. Investigators in crisp suits photographed the damaged, collected fragments of concrete and carefully bagged the jackhammer, still bearing traces of Karen Albright's pristine white gloves. Karen, after an initial sputtering protest about HOA sovereignty and property rights, had been formally arrested by the federal agents, read her Miranda rights in a firm, no-nonsense tone, and escorted white-faced and trembling to an unmarked government vehicle. The spectacle drew shocked and curious neighbors from their homes, their Saturday morning routines irrevocably disrupted. Alana, after giving a concise professional statement to the lead federal investigator, Special Agent Davies, focused her attention on Maya. Her daughter was still shaken, the bravado she often displayed dimmed by the morning's ugly events. "Mommy," Maya whispered, her voice small, as Alana knelt beside her wheelchair. "Is Mrs. Albright going to jail for a long time?" She said she wanted us to move out. Yes, baby, she did say that," Alana said, her voice gentle but firm as she smoothed Maya's hair. "And what she did was very wrong and very illegal. There are laws to protect people, to ensure everyone has a right to live where they choose and move around safely. Mrs. Albright broke those laws in a very serious way, and yes, she is in a lot of trouble." Alana didn't want to frighten Maya, but she also wouldn't downplay the severity of Karen's actions. "The ramp will be fixed, Maya. I promise you. It will be better and stronger than before." But fixing the ramp, Alana knew, would be a process. Bureaucracy, even for emergency repairs, moved at its own pace. In the meantime, Maya's world had shrunk dramatically. The demolished ramp was on the most direct route to her school bus stop, to Chloe's house, to the small park where she sometimes met friends. Alternative routes were longer, more difficult, involving uneven pavement, or forcing Maya to use the street itself, a dangerous proposition. Her hard-won independence, the simple joy of being able to navigate her own neighborhood, had been stolen by Karen Albright's malice. The Oakwood Preserve, HOA, was thrown into immediate disarray. With their president arrested on federal charges, the remaining board members, a collection of mostly timid individuals long accustomed to Karen's autocratic rule, were like deer caught in headlights. An emergency board meeting was called, from which Alana was pointedly excluded, though she received a garbled, panicked voicemail from the HOA secretary, a nervous woman named Cynthia, vaguely apologizing for the unfortunate incident and assuring her the board was looking into the matter. Alana, however, was not waiting for the HOA to look into the matter. As ADA Infrastructure Supervisor, She had the authority to initiate immediate action when federally protected accessibility was compromised. She officially designated the demolished ramp site as a critical infrastructure failure requiring emergency remediation. She contacted the city's Public Works Department, outlining the federal statutes Karen had violated and the urgent need for repair. She also began compiling a comprehensive report for her superiors at the Department of Justice, detailing not only the destruction of the ramp, but also Karen Albright's explicit discriminatory statements, which clearly indicated a hate-based motive. This wasn't just vandalism, it was a civil rights violation of the highest order. Karen Albright, to Alana's disgust, but not surprise, made bail within 48 hours. Her husband, a wealthy property developer with considerable local influence, had apparently hired a high-powered, notoriously aggressive defense attorney. The conditions of her bail included a strict no-contact order with Alana or Maya, and she was prohibited from coming within 1,000 feet of their residence or any ADA-related infrastructure project. But Alana knew that Karen's influence, her ability to cause trouble, extended far beyond her physical presence. The first salvo in Karen's counteroffensive came not directly, but through the HOA. A week after the incident, Alana received a registered letter. It was an official notice of violation from the Oakwood Preserve HOA, signed by the acting president, a longtime crony of Karen's named Bob Henderson. The notice alleged that the original curb ramp, the one Karen had demolished, had been improperly installed without full board consensus and had created an unacceptable aesthetic deviation from community standards. It further stated that any and all debris from the structure in question, the demolished ramp, must be cleared by the homeowner at 471 Acacia Drive, Alana's address, within 7 days, or face daily fines. It was a breathtakingly audacious piece of gaslighting, an attempt to blame Alana for the very destruction Karen had wrought. Alana's response was swift and ironclad. She sent a cease and desist letter drafted by DOJ lawyers, citing the ongoing federal criminal investigation, the clear evidence of Karen Albright's culpability, and the HOA's potential liability for aiding and abetting discrimination and obstruction of justice. She reminded them that the original ramp had full city, and yes, HOA approval, with signed documents to prove it, and that the debris was part of an active federal crime scene. She also formally put the HOA on notice that any further attempts at harassment or retaliation would be met with the full force of federal law. But Karen Albright was not so easily deterred. Her strategy, it became clear, was to wage a war of attrition to make Alana's life so unbearable that she would consider moving out. The neighborhood, once a place of relative peace, became a landscape of subtle hostility. Whispers followed Alana when she walked to her car. Some neighbors, previously friendly, now avoided her gaze. Others emboldened by Karen's narrative, which was being spread through anonymous flyers and carefully curated social media posts, painting Karen as a martyred community champion, and Alana as an abusive government agent, became openly critical. One flyer, tucked under Alana's windshield wiper, depicted a caricature of a woman in a wheelchair, demanding gold-plated ramps with the caption, "Enough is enough. Our HOA dues aren't for special privileges." Maya, already traumatized, felt the shift acutely. Children on the school bus parroting their parents made cruel comments. Her best friend, Chloe's parents, intimidated by the increasingly toxic atmosphere and worried about getting involved, began making excuses for why Maya couldn't come over to play. Maya's isolation deepened her bright spirit, dimming under the weight of this relentless, insidious bullying. She started refusing to leave the house even for essential therapy appointments. The vibrant purple of her wheelchair seemed to mock her immobility. Alana watched her daughter retreat, her heart aching with a mixture of rage and helplessness. The legal battles she could fight, the professional challenges she could meet, but the emotional toll on Maya, the theft of her childhood joy and confidence, that was a wound that cut deeper than any jackhammer. The city, navigating its own bureaucratic hurdles, and perhaps some political pressure from Karen Albright's husband's connections, was slow to begin repairs on the ramp. They put up temporary wooden ramps, but these were often unsteady, difficult for Maya to navigate independently, and Alana suspected sometimes deliberately misplaced or obstructed overnight. One morning, they found the temporary ramp at the end of their street, overturned with nails scattered around it. There was no direct proof of who had done it, but the malice was unmistakable. This was an escalation, a direct threat to Maya's safety. Alana knew she had to do more than just react to Karen's provocations. She had to understand the full scope of Karen Albright's influence and potential vulnerabilities. As ADA Infrastructure Supervisor, Alana's purview included not just ensuring compliance with accessibility laws, but also overseeing the distribution and proper use of federal grants allocated for accessibility projects. Many communities, including affluent ones like Oakwood Preserve, applied for these grants to help offset the costs of making public spaces and common areas accessible. Things like retrofitting clubhouse restrooms, installing playground equipment for children of all abilities, or indeed constructing curb ramps. A thought began to form in Alana's mind. Had the Oakwood Preserve HOA ever applied for or received such grants? And if so, how had those funds been managed under Karen Albright's stewardship? It was a long shot, but if Karen had mishandled federal money, it would add a powerful new dimension to the case against her and potentially give Alana leverage over the entire HOA. Working late into the night, after Maya was finally asleep, Alana began to delve into her office's database of grant applications and compliance reports. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, searching cross-referencing, and then she found it. 3 years prior, the Oakwood Preserve HOA, under Karen Albright's signature as president, had applied for and received a substantial federal grant, nearly $250,000, for a community-wide accessibility enhancement project. The grant proposal outlined several specific initiatives retrofitting the community pool with a chairlift, upgrading pathways in the common park areas to be wheelchair accessible, installing accessible playground equipment, and significantly a project to ensure all street corners within Oakwood Preserve met current ADA curb ramp standards. The grant had been approved and the funds disbursed. According to the progress reports filed by Karen Albright, all projects had been completed on time and under budget. But Alana, looking at the broken, jagged concrete at the end of her street, at the memory of Maya's stranded wheelchair, knew that at least one part of that statement was a lie. And if Karen had lied about the curb ramps, what else had she misrepresented? This was the midpoint, the critical juncture where the personal battle began to intersect with a potentially massive case of federal fraud. Karen Albright's vendetta against Alana and Maya might have inadvertently exposed a far more significant crime. The jackhammer that had shattered Maya's ramp might have also shattered Karen's carefully constructed facade of respectable community leadership, revealing something rotten at the core. Alana felt a cold, hard knot of determination tighten within her. She wasn't just fighting for her daughter's right to a curb ramp anymore. She was about to uncover the full extent of Karen Albright's deceptions, and she would use every ounce of her federal authority to bring her down. The stakes had just been raised exponentially, and Alana, the meticulous ADA Infrastructure Supervisor, was now on the hunt. The discovery of the Oakwood Preserve HOA's federal grant for community-wide accessibility enhancement became the new focal point of Alana's investigation, running parallel to the criminal case concerning the ramp's destruction. While Special Agent Davies' team continued to build the hate crime and vandalism case against Karen Albright, Alana, with a grim sense of purpose, initiated a formal audit of the grant's administration. This was squarely within her purview as ADA Infrastructure Supervisor, a role that included ensuring the responsible and compliant use of taxpayer money allocated for accessibility. She assembled a small trusted team from her own office, a forensic accountant, a civil engineer specializing in ADA design, and a paralegal with expertise in federal grant regulations. Their first step was a thorough review of the documentation Karen Albright had submitted to secure and report on the grant. The proposal itself was professionally written, full of compelling language about inclusivity and community betterment. The progress reports signed by Karen detailed successful project completions, accompanied by invoices from various contractors and photographs purporting to show the finished work. However, as Alana and her team began to scrutinize these documents more closely, discrepancies and red flags started to emerge with alarming frequency. The invoices from several contractors, particularly for the pathway upgrades and some of the playground equipment, seemed unusually high, often lacking detailed breakdowns of costs. When Alana's forensic accountant ran background checks on these companies, a disturbing pattern emerged. A few of them were recently formed LLCs with minimal public presence, and their listed addresses, often traced back to mail drops or residential properties owned by individuals with known connections to Karen Albright or her husband's development company. The photographs submitted as proof of completion were often taken from specific, flattering angles, and some seemed suspiciously generic, as if they could have been stock photos or images from entirely different projects. The civil engineer on Alana's team then conducted a discreet, unannounced site visit to Oakwood Preserve, meticulously inspecting the projects Karen had claimed were completed under the grant. His findings were damning. The community pool did have a chairlift, but it was a cheaper, less robust model than the one specified in the grant proposal and invoiced for. The upgraded pathways in the common park areas were only partially repaved, with many sections still cracked, uneven, and non-compliant with ADA slope requirements. The much-touted accessible playground equipment consisted of a single token adaptive swing, while the rest of the playground remained largely inaccessible to children with mobility impairments. And most glaringly, while some older curb ramps in less trafficked areas of the neighborhood had been given a superficial cosmetic upgrade, many, like the one at the end of Alana's street, had either never been installed or, as Maya's case so brutally demonstrated, were considered expendable. It was a systematic pattern of deception, of cutting corners, of likely embezzlement and fraud, all hidden beneath a veneer of community improvement and compliance. Karen Albright hadn't just destroyed one curb ramp out of personal malice. She had potentially defrauded the federal government and her own community out of hundreds of thousands of dollars, all while cynically using the language of accessibility to line her own pockets or those of her associates. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about one woman's discriminatory actions anymore. This was about a potential conspiracy to defraud the U.S. government, a serious federal crime with severe penalties. Alana realized that Karen Albright's increasingly desperate and vicious attacks on her and Maya might have been fueled not just by bigotry, but by a panicked fear of exposure. Alana, with her professional expertise in ADA compliance and grant oversight, living right in the heart of Oakwood Preserve, represented an existential threat to Karen's illicit schemes. Destroying Maya's ramp and trying to drive their family out might have been a reckless attempt to eliminate that threat. Alana presented her team's preliminary findings to Special Agent Davies and the U.S. Attorney's Office. The reaction was immediate and intense. The investigation into Karen Albright expanded significantly, now encompassing wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, and making false statements to federal officials. Subpoenas were issued for Karen Albright's personal and business bank records, as well as the full unredacted financial records of the Oakwood Preserve HOA, going back several years. The net around Karen was tightening not just for her act of vandalism, but for a potentially far larger criminal enterprise. Meanwhile, the situation in Oakwood Preserve continued to fester. The HOA board, now under intense scrutiny and terrified of their own potential liability, had become paralyzed. Basic services were beginning to suffer. The temporary wooden ramp at the end of Alana's street, after being vandalized a second time, found one morning smashed into pieces, was not replaced by the city, who cited ongoing safety concerns and lack of HOA cooperation in securing the site. Maya was now almost entirely confined to their home and yard, her frustration and sadness a constant silent reproach. Alana arranged for her to have video calls with Chloe and for her schoolwork to be sent home, but it was a poor substitute for real-world interaction and independence. Karen Albright, despite the expanding investigation, remained defiant. Through her lawyer, she issued a statement decrying the politically motivated witch hunt and the abuse of federal power by a disgruntled homeowner with a personal vendetta. She continued to rally her supporters within Oakwood Preserve, who organized small disruptive protests outside Alana's house, chanting slogans about HOA rights and community integrity. Their faces contorted with a manufactured outrage that barely concealed their fear and ignorance. One evening, a rock was thrown through Alana's living room window, narrowly missing Maya, who was watching television. The police report was filed, but the culprits, likely teenagers incited by the toxic rhetoric, were never found. The sense of siege was palpable. Alana felt as if she were living in a pressure cooker. The weight of the federal investigation, the concern for Maya's well-being, the relentless hostility from a segment of her community, the demands of her own high-stakes job. It was almost overwhelming. There were moments late at night when she would sit alone in the dark, the silence of the house amplifying her fears, and wonder if Karen Albright would succeed in breaking her in, forcing them out. But then she would think of Maya's courage, of her quiet resilience in the face of such blatant cruelty, and her resolve would harden anew. She would see this through not just for Maya, but for every individual who had ever been marginalized, dismissed, or denied their fundamental right to access and dignity. The HOA, in a last-ditch effort to assert its authority, or perhaps deflect blame, scheduled an emergency town hall meeting to discuss the ongoing infrastructure crisis and the associated financial burdens on the community. The agenda circulated by Bob Henderson was clearly designed to be a public trial of Alana, focusing on the controversial curb ramp issue and the escalating costs of federal compliance. Karen Albright, despite her bail conditions, announced through her lawyer that she would be attending and speaking to set the record straight and defend her reputation. This, Alana knew, would be the climax. This public forum, intended by Karen and her allies to be her condemnation, would instead become the stage for their unmasking. Alana, armed with the now substantial evidence of the ramp destruction, the hate-based motivation, and the explosive findings of the federal grant fraud investigation, prepared for the confrontation. She arranged for Special Agent Davies and a representative from the U.S. Attorney's Office to be present discreetly at the meeting. The quiet, leafy streets of Oakwood Preserve were about to witness a reckoning that would resonate far beyond its manicured lawns and faux colonial facades. The fight for a simple curb ramp had escalated into a battle for the soul of a community and the integrity of a federal promise, and Alana Washington was ready. The Oakwood Preserve Community Clubhouse buzzed with an anxious, almost febrile energy. Every seat was filled, and residents stood 3 deep along the walls, a sea of faces reflecting a volatile mix of anger, fear, curiosity, and a dawning sense of betrayal. The air was thick with unspoken accusations and the low hum of agitated whispers. At the head table sat the visibly sweating members of the HOA board, with Karen Albright positioned prominently among them, her expression a carefully crafted mask of wronged innocence and steely resolve. Her high-powered attorney sat beside her occasionally, leaning in to whisper in her ear. Alana entered the room with Maya by her side, Maya's purple wheelchair navigating the crowded aisle with quiet dignity. A hush fell over the room as they made their way to the front row, reserved for them by a surprisingly assertive Cynthia, the HOA secretary, who shot Alana a look of mingled fear and support. Special Agent Davies and Assistant U.S. Attorney Chen were seated unobtrusively near the back, their presence known only to Alana, Bob Henderson. The acting HOA president gavelled the meeting to order, his voice shaky. This emergency town hall has been called. He began reading nervously from a script to address the ongoing situation concerning certain infrastructure elements within our community, the resulting financial implications, and to allow residents to voice their concerns. He studiously avoided looking at Alana. Karen Albright was the first to speak, her voice smooth and practiced resonating with a theatrical quaver of emotion. She portrayed herself as a dedicated public servant, a tireless volunteer who had only ever acted in the best interests of Oakwood Preserve. She painted Alana as an aggressive, unreasonable outsider, using her federal position to bully the community and make exorbitant demands for one family's special treatment. She referred to the demolished curb ramp as a minor disputed piece of concrete, and lamented the unjust persecution she was enduring for simply trying to uphold aesthetic standards and fiscal responsibility. She spoke of community harmony being shattered by unwarranted federal overreach. It was a masterclass in deflection and victimhood, and some of her core supporters in the audience nodded along, murmuring their agreement. When it was Alana's turn to speak, a profound silence fell over the room. She wheeled Maya to the small podium, then stood beside her daughter, a protective and formidable presence. "Good evening." Alana began, her voice calm, clear, and carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. "My name is Alana Washington. This is my daughter Maya. We are residents of Oakwood Preserve. We are also American citizens, entitled to the full protection and promise of its laws." She then, with meticulous precision and unassailable evidence, dismantled Karen Albright's narrative. She displayed large, high-resolution photographs of the demolished curb ramp, the jagged concrete, the mangled rebar. She played a short, clear audio recording, captured by a neighbor's security camera, of Karen Albright's voice on that Saturday morning, explicitly stating her intent. Perhaps if certain accommodations weren't so readily available, People who don't quite fit in would realize this isn't the place for them. Maybe they'd simply choose to move out. The ugly words, the naked discriminatory animus, hung in the air, shocking many in the audience into stunned silence. This was not about aesthetics or fiscal responsibility or community harmony. Alana stated, her gaze sweeping across the room before landing squarely on Karen Albright. This was a deliberate, premeditated act of discrimination and destruction designed to intimidate a child with a disability and drive her family from their home. It was a hate crime, pure and simple. She then detailed the federal laws Karen had violated, the ongoing criminal investigation, and the severe penalties Karen faced. She spoke of Maya's fear, her isolation, the theft of her independence. Her voice, though controlled, thrummed with a mother's pain and a federal officer's outrage. Then Alana pivoted. But Mrs. Albright's actions, her contempt for the law and for basic human decency, do not, it appears, exist in a vacuum. It seems her disregard for rules extends to the very funds entrusted to her by this community and by the federal government. This was the moment the atmosphere in the room shifted from tense to explosive. Alana presented a summarized overview of her team's findings regarding the $250,000 federal accessibility grant, the falsified reports, the substandard work, the inflated invoices from shell companies linked to Karen and her husband, the tens of thousands of dollars that were simply unaccounted for. She showed comparative photographs, the projects Karen claimed were completed versus the reality on the ground. She displayed flowcharts tracing HOA funds into accounts controlled by Karen's associates. This isn't just about a curb ramp anymore, Alana declared, her voice ringing through the clubhouse. This is about a systematic abuse of power, a betrayal of trust, and a massive fraud perpetrated against the taxpayers of this country and the residents of Oakwood Preserve. Mrs. Albright didn't just try to deny my daughter access. She and potentially others on this board have been actively stealing from you, all under the guise of community service. The room erupted. Shouts of anger, disbelief, and betrayal flew from all corners. Homeowners who had long harbored suspicions about Karen's management, who had questioned the endless fee hikes and the lack of transparency, now saw their fears confirmed in stark, undeniable detail. Karen Albright's face was ashen, her composure finally shattering. Her lawyer was frantically trying to silence her as she began to shriek, "Lies, it's all lies. She's twisting everything." At that precise moment, Special Agent Davies and AUSA Chen stood up and began to walk purposefully towards the head table, flanked by two uniformed local police officers who had entered discreetly during Alana's presentation. Karen Albright. Agent Davies announced, his voice cutting through the uproar. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mail fraud, theft of government property, and making false statements to federal officials, in addition to the pending charges related to civil rights violations and destruction of property." As Karen was handcuffed and led away sobbing and protesting, AUSA Chen addressed the stunned and chaotic assembly. The United States Attorney's Office, in conjunction with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division and the Office of the Inspector General, is hereby announcing that all federal grant eligibility for the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association is immediately suspended. All current and past board members who served during the period of this grant will be subject to investigation and potential prosecution. A federal audit of the HOA's complete financials is now underway. We will seek full restitution of all misappropriated funds. The pronouncement fell like a thunderclap. The community, already reeling from the exposure of Karen's personal vendetta, now faced the devastating consequences of her greed, financial ruin, federal oversight, and the loss of access to crucial funding for their future. The fight for Maya's curb ramp had culminated in the unmasking of a deep-seated corruption, leaving a community shocked, enraged, and facing a long, uncertain road to recovery. Alana watched Karen Albright being escorted out, a small, pathetic figure, stripped of her power and arrogance. There was no triumph in Alana's heart, only a profound weariness and the grim understanding that while one battle had been won, the war for true accessibility, true justice, and true community was an ongoing struggle. But tonight, at least, a significant blow had been struck against the forces of hate and corruption. And Maya, sitting quietly beside her, reached out and squeezed her mother's hand, a silent acknowledgement of the fierce, unwavering love that had brought them to this moment. The fallout from Karen Albright's arrest and the exposure of the systemic fraud within the Oakwood Preserve HOA was immediate and far-reaching. Karen was denied bail, this time deemed a significant flight risk and a danger to the community due to evidence of witness intimidation during the grant fraud investigation. Her high-powered attorney, facing an avalanche of irrefutable evidence, began quietly exploring plea bargain options, though the U.S. Attorney's Office made it clear they would be seeking the maximum possible penalties. Several other current and former HOA board members who had served during Karen's tenure, including Bob Henderson, were indicted as co-conspirators or for gross negligence in their oversight duties. The once proud Oakwood Preserve HOA was effectively dismantled its assets, frozen its reputation in tatters. The federal government appointed a temporary receiver to manage the HOA's essential affairs and cooperate with the ongoing audit and investigations. The audit revealed the true extent of Karen's embezzlement. Nearly $400,000 had been systematically siphoned off over 5 years through a complex web of falsified invoices, shell corporations, and kickbacks. The community was left with substandard infrastructure, depleted reserve funds, and a legacy of betrayal. Residents faced the grim reality of significant special assessments and increased dues for years to come, simply to bring their community back to a baseline level of repair and solvency, let alone fund any future improvements. The revocation of federal grant eligibility was a particularly bitter pill, a stark reminder of the trust Karen had so spectacularly violated. For Alana and Maya, life began to slowly, painstakingly find a new normal. The immediate threat and harassment were gone. The curb ramp at the end of their street was rebuilt, this time under the direct supervision of Alana's own federal office, to a standard exceeding all ADA requirements, a small, tangible symbol of justice prevailing. Maya, watching the new, perfectly sloped concrete being poured, a small, triumphant smile on her face, declared it the best ramp in the whole world. Her joy, her renewed sense of freedom, as she once again navigated her neighborhood independently, was Alana's greatest reward. The wider community of Oakwood Preserve embarked on a difficult period of soul-searching and rebuilding. Town hall meetings, once forums for Karen Albright's autocratic pronouncements, became spaces for genuine, often painful dialogue. Residents grappled with their own complicity, their past unwillingness to challenge Karen's authority, their collective failure to protect their most vulnerable members. A new interim HOA board was eventually elected, composed of residents committed to transparency, accountability, and genuine community service. One of their first acts was to issue a formal public apology to Alana and Maya, and to establish a permanent accessibility and inclusion committee, inviting Alana to serve as an advisory member. The legal process against Karen Albright and her co-conspirators ground on. Karen, facing the overwhelming weight of evidence, eventually accepted a plea deal that saw her sentenced to a lengthy term in federal prison, stripped of all her ill-gotten assets, and ordered to pay substantial restitution to both the federal government and the Oakwood Preserve HOA. Her husband, implicated in several of the fraudulent schemes through his development company, also faced charges and significant financial ruin. The empire they had built on deceit and intimidation crumbled into dust. Months later, Alana stood with Maya at the newly renovated Oakwood Preserve Community Park. The accessible playground equipment, once a token gesture, had been completely overhauled, funded by a combination of court-ordered restitution from Karen and a series of community fundraisers spearheaded by the new HOA board. Children of all abilities played together, their laughter echoing in the crisp autumn air. Maya, her purple wheelchair adorned with flowers, was right in the middle of it, her face alight with joy as she raced a new friend on an adaptive swing. Alana watched her, a profound sense of peace settling over her. The fight had been brutal, the cost high, both personally and for their community. There were still scars, still financial burdens, still lessons being learned. But out of the ugliness of discrimination and corruption, something new and better was emerging, a community more aware, more engaged, more committed to the principles of fairness and inclusion. Her role as ADA infrastructure supervisor had given her the tools to fight, but it was her love for Maya, her unwavering belief in her daughter's right to live a full and unimpeded life, that had given her the strength. A member of the new HOA board, a young father named David, who had been one of the first to publicly support Alana after the revelations, walked over to her. "It's good, isn't it?" he said, gesturing towards the vibrant playground. We still have a long way to go to fix everything Karen broke financially and in terms of trust. But this is a start, and we wouldn't be here without you and Maya." Alana smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "We did it together, David, as a community." As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the park, Maya wheeled over to Alana, her eyes shining. "Mommy," she said, her voice clear and confident, "this is the best park ever. Can we come back tomorrow?" "Absolutely, sweetie," Alana said, pulling her daughter close. "We can come back every day." The fight for a simple curb ramp had ignited a revolution in Oakwood Preserve, a revolution of conscience and accountability. And as Alana looked at her daughter so full of life and promise, she knew that every battle fought in the name of justice and accessibility, no matter how small it might seem, had the power to change the world, one community, one child, one ramp at a time. The path ahead would not always be smooth, but it would, Alana was certain, always be accessible.